And that is really impressive to anybody who pays attention. Second reason why it's such an honor is because there's been a great bond over the years actually between the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps, probably highlighted by the 27th of September 1942, when Marines had to land as part of the Battle of Guadalcanal, about 500 Marines from the 7th Marine Regiment. And there was a young man, 22 years old, Douglas Monroe, who was going to be responsible for that section of landing craft to get the Marines in. He landed them with the other landing craft, and then they learned very quickly that the Japanese had more power and began to ambush the Marines on the beachhead. The only solution was to retract those Marines off. So Monroe brought his section back in, began to get Marines on those landing craft, but then Douglas Monroe put his landing craft in between the Japanese fire and the Marines, and he would be killed in action. And his last words, interestingly enough, were, did they get off? That's all he cared about. Did the Marines get off, as he gave his life on their behalf? Interestingly enough, one of the Marines that was saved there at that battle was a guy named Chesty Puller, who would become an icon in the Marine Corps. He would win 5 Navy Crosses, the second highest decoration for bravery between World War II and Korea. There would not have been a Chesty Puller if there had not been a Douglas Monroe. And at Marine Corps University in Quantico, Virginia, we've got a very distinct painting there that depicts that action on that 27 September 1942. And the third reason is very personal, and that is one of my sons, Stephen, is a petty officer, 3rd class in the Coast Guard. He was initially stationed up in Kodiak, Alaska, on board the cutter Monroe, and he read Guardian of Guadalcanal, which is the full story about Monroe before he went there, because his dad told him to read it. And then he went to Yorktown for damage control school, and he's now aboard the cutter James out of Charleston, and they're actually in the Pacific right now. I just got an email from him. What's that?
I'm going to see your son.
Are you really?
About 2 months.
All right. He's a good man. Take good care of him. He wrote me an email last night because he knew I was going to get to speak to you all today, and he shared a couple of things, and one of the things that really struck me was he said, Dad, we're doing our mission really well. I can't tell you much more, but it would make you and Mom and the nation proud. So that's why it's an honor to be here. Stephen actually is only one of my 10 children. Thought I'd throw that in just for laughs this morning. I have 6 boys and 4 girls, ages 20 to 37, 9 grandchildren, and they're all mine. And they're all with the same wife, and we know how it happens. You're kind of wondering about me right from the start. You're the love of my life. We normally have traveled over the years in a 15-passenger van. That's how you get a big family around. And normally when we do those kinds of trips, there's always a lot of excitement, a lot of questions. It's not very relaxing for the driver. But yesterday, I departed at a very early hour from my house to go up to Baltimore Washington International Airport, and then get on a plane and fly through Salt Lake City, eventually get to Portland, and then drive up here. And it was truthfully a very peaceful time, particularly that drive from Portland here. Beautiful drive. And it was quiet. No one was asking me any questions. I could turn to whatever radio station I wanted. And all of a sudden, as I was coming up, I thought about this Marine friend of mine who was stationed at Camp Pendleton, California, which is near San Diego. He was married, he had 6 children, they were all under the age of 12. And he had a new assignment to go to the U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany. So he went first, thinking that he would kind of set up shop and then he would come back to help his wife get everybody over there, but it didn't turn out that way. He got caught up in some operational planning and he couldn't get back when it was time for them to go. So his wife had to take on the responsibility and gather them all up and drive from San Diego to Los Angeles to start the trip, because that's where the plane was going out of, was LAX. That trip in itself is a challenge. She gets up there, gets them all on the plane. They fly from Los Angeles to Baltimore, change planes, Baltimore to Frankfurt, Germany. When she enters into Customs and Immigration, there's two individuals there as she brings the family in. One is a German customs official, and the other is a U.S. Army military policeman. Because normally the military does work in tandem when military families are brought into an international destination like that. I think she told us his name was Sergeant Jackson, U.S. Army. So Jackson sees this family coming in, the wife and the 6 children, after 27 hours of traveling. So you can imagine the children are a little angry, disheveled, dirty, not looking good. And she has 2 of those silver pallets just stacked with luggage. She's dragging those, dragging the kids, comes into Customs and Immigration. Sergeant Jackson steps forward, says, "Ma'am, I'd like to welcome you to Germany." And he's about to start his pitch that he normally does, but he just stops. And he goes, "Ma'am, is this all your luggage?" She says, "Yes, it's all my luggage." "Are these all your children?" She says, "Yes, they're all my children." He says, "Well, I don't want to delay your entry into Germany, but I need to ask you the same questions I ask everyone else. Are you carrying any illegal drugs, alcohol, knives, or guns?" She says, "Sir, if I had any of those, I would have used them already." Yeah, so we know what that feels like. But coming up here, it was nice and smooth. I'm a great believer in the fundamentals. As was mentioned, I've coached lacrosse. If you're not familiar with that sport, it's a little bit like hockey, soccer, a lot of things combined with sticks and goals and things like that. Been doing that for over 40 years now. And one of the things that I've noticed is, in lacrosse in specific, but I think in sports in general, is the most successful teams are always the ones that are really, really good at the fundamentals. They do the basics extremely well, and that carries them through from year to year. I think that's true of sports teams. I think it's true of military units. I think it's true of corporations, nonprofit, it doesn't matter. Doing the fundamentals well every day. That's what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. I also believe, though, that for leaders, there are fundamentals as well. And we have to get a hold of these fundamentals if we're going to move from ordinary to extraordinary as well. One of those fundamentals is something that in leadership circles, I find we actually don't talk a lot about. Now, every once in a while something will come up about it. Someone will send an article, maybe a chapter out of a book. But we don't look in depth at this particular fundamental of leadership that I've become convinced is the #1 fundamental above everything else if we're going to be extraordinary leaders. As a matter of fact, if we get this one right, we have a shot at actually living with integrity, leading with excellence, and building extraordinary teams. You sort of get all 3. Now, it's not going to guarantee it, but without it, I can guarantee that you won't be extraordinary. And this particular fundamental is an attribute. It's a characteristic. Some would call it a virtue. And this particular attribute, characteristic, or virtue, to me, stands at the foundation. And that attribute, characteristic, is the attribute of humility. Humility. Now that might seem strange coming from a Marine, because one of our favorite bumper stickers is, when you're the finest, it's hard to be humble. We like that bumper sticker. I think it's hard for Marines. I think it's hard for Coast Guardsmen. I think it's hard in your leadership positions. As a matter of fact, the higher up you go, the more stuff you have on your chest, the bigger your title, the more challenging it becomes. And the more important it becomes. And I think we have to deal with this every day. And again, I don't think we think enough about what this really means. But I continue to see, when I work with dysfunctional teams or units or companies or whatever it is, at the heart of it is a problem in this area. Invariably. There may be something that looks like that's the main problem, but when you really pull the chain, it isn't. The problem is that there are leaders who think it's more about themselves than it is about the people, the mission, and service. So I'd like us to think a little bit about this particular aspect. But by the way, I should tell you, I don't think humility is a weakness. Like sometimes that word itself kind of pushes us back and we say, yeah, I don't want to be humble. I mean, people walk all over me. I won't be able to hold people to standards. I won't be able to demand excellence. If you think that, then I think you have the wrong perspective on what humility really is. I think humility is actually a great strength. C.S. Lewis, the British author, once said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Those are different. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So it means that we can be confident and still be humble leaders. But if the majority of the time we're really focused on ourselves, then we're going to have some problems. And I believe there's a spectrum that goes from healthy humility to unhealthy arrogance. And we're somewhere on that spectrum. So over here, this unhealthy arrogance side, this is about selfish ambition. We spend an awful lot of time thinking about how do we get the spotlight? How do we get to the next step? And then the other part of it is vain conceit, where we just think a lot more highly of ourselves than we probably should. And on the other side of the spectrum, where it's about healthy humility, that's where we consider others more important than ourselves. Where we look out for others' interests, not just our own interests. And it's not about us, it's about the people. It's about the mission, it's about service. But it's not about us. I'd like you to picture that spectrum for a second right now. And I'd like you to, in your mind, put an X where you think you are right now. Healthy humility to unhealthy arrogance, where would you put yourself? So I want you to make a note of that mentally, because we're going to come back to that. But I hope everyone else picks where their X would be. I want to answer just a couple of questions. The first question is, what does it look like when we're on the wrong side of the spectrum? What does it actually look like when we're on the unhealthy arrogance side? Because I think if we're going to understand how to be leaders who are humble, we better understand what it looks like when we're not doing it right. Because there's a couple of things that tend to come up. One is we lose perspective on who we are. You're all talented or you wouldn't be in this room. You have accomplished things. You have ribbons to justify that. You have rank. You have all those kinds of things. Good for you. The question is whether those become more important than just this daily life of using our talents in service of other people. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, wrote a book called Road to Character. And in that book he says, we have to decide whether we're more interested in our resume or our eulogy. See, our resume is what we accomplished. The eulogy is what they're going to say about us when we die. And that's all about our character. And the resume is pretty fleeting. The eulogy is the thing that has a potential of maybe carrying through for a long period of time. So the question becomes do we keep the right perspective as we're leading people? Particularly when the spotlight's on us and when people are looking up to us and they want to kind of honor you because of who you are. How do we do with that? How do we do when we have a particularly unique talent that people come up and, oh, you're so good at that, Well, we should say thank you, but don't let it become you. And I had to deal with this a long time ago. I wish I'd learned the lesson a little stronger than I did, but it was one of the starting points of learning some of these lessons. I grew up in New York, outside of New York City on Long Island. And I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. In my high school, we were in 9th through 12th grade. And my main sport, my most important sport was baseball. I played baseball in the spring. I was a pitcher. I'm going to talk about humility, but I was actually a really good pitcher. As a matter of fact, I was good enough that my dad had a vision for me that I would be a pitcher at Yankee Stadium someday with a New York Yankee uniform on. So he invested a lot in me as a baseball player. As a matter of fact, we had a very small backyard, but Dad built a mound, a literal pitcher's mound, and a home plate, regulation distance, lights in the backyard, so I could pitch to him at night whenever I could. There's another book out there called Outliers by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell that says if you want to be an expert in your field, you better have 10,000 hours doing whatever it is. I had 10,000 hours plus as a baseball pitcher because of my dad. So I go from my 9th grade year into my getting ready to end that season in the spring. Good baseball season, things are going great. And my high school, when I'm a 9th grader, is in the Long Island Lacrosse Championship. In my era, the 3 hotbeds of lacrosse were Baltimore, Long Island, and upstate New York. So this was like the big championship game. My high school's going to be in it. So I'm like, okay, well, I've never seen a lacrosse game, but I'm going to support the guys, so I'm going to go watch this game. It was at Hofstra University, a big university on Long Island, AstroTurf field, very few AstroTurf fields, lights, it was electric. And I'm watching the hitting, the movement of the ball, and I make a decision right up in the stands. Next year, going to drop baseball, I'm going to start playing this sport. I love it. I love what I see. And then as I'm driving home, I realize, whoa, that means I got to tell my dad. Now, my original last name is Athanasiadis. That's Greek. It was shot to Athens when my family came from Greece to the United States. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. But that was my family. We had the statues and the fountains and the big Greek flags, and Dad, who thought he's pretty much ran everything. And if you're going to make a big decision like this, you got to go talk to Dad. So go to Dad that night. So I'm talking to a Greek New Yorker. Bad combination. So I go to Dad and I say, Dad, I know you've never seen a lacrosse game before, but I made kind of a big decision. I'm going to drop baseball next year, and I'm going to start playing lacrosse. So my dad, in his best New York Greek ways, says, what are you talking about? I said, well, Dad, again, I know you haven't seen a game, but I think I can be good at it. Should have anticipated his next question. I didn't. His next question was, so what position are you going to play? I didn't know the names of the positions on the field, but I knew my dad, and I knew I better have an answer like that. So I'm picturing the field like in milliseconds, and I realize, wait, there's someone in front of the goal. They must call that person a goalie. Just a shot. So I say to Dad very confidently, Dad, I'm going to be a goalie. He says, well, what do you know about being a goalie? I said, Dad, I don't know anything about it, but I promise you I'll work hard. My dad goes, that's Greek for, that's a stupid idea. I had that a couple of times in my life. So to my dad's credit, he didn't stand in my way. So I bought a ball. I bought a lacrosse book that had pictures of how you play lacrosse. That was to prepare me to be a Marine, so I didn't have to read anything. It was all pictures. And then I bought a lacrosse stick. And I bought a goalie stick, which is a distinct-looking stick on the lacrosse field. Because now I'm a goalie. I don't get to go back to Dad and say, Dad, I've been watching them play. Like, they shoot the ball like 90, 100 miles an hour at the goal. I don't want to be a goalie. I want to be one of those. No, I'm a goalie because I told Dad. So I go down to my local elementary school that had a nice brick wall, and I'd go down every day during the summer. I put out my little book with the goalie section, and I would practice whatever it said in the book against that wall. So I move into my 10th grade year. In my era, if you were a 9th grader, you played freshman athletics, 10th grader, junior varsity, 11th and 12th varsity. They didn't bring people up, switch people around, you stayed in your lane. So 10th grade, play my fall winter sport. Now it's lacrosse season. Pretty excited. One problem. This was all theoretical out of a book. I had never had someone shoot a ball at me like who was a human being. So as I go to the first practice, the first thing I notice is there's 3 other goalies on the junior varsity team besides myself, which I thought was a little excessive. And then I realized, no, this is the premier sport in my high school. So there's going to be a lot, and these guys have been playing this since they were pretty young. So it's a lot harder than I thought. First scrimmage game, I remember, was all 4s. I get thrown in the 4th quarter with 4 minutes left. So all the other goalies have played. Now it's at the end. They throw the guy in there. So I'm in the goal. 4 shots taken at me. 4 goals go in. So I stop nothing. Come off the field pretty dejected. My junior varsity coach comes over, puts his arm around me and says, hey, don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on yourself. You got some ability there. So I didn't give up on myself. By the first real game, I'm the starting goalie. We go undefeated. I get selected as the MVP. So I'm thinking a lot about myself. I'm thinking, look at this. I've never even played this game before. MVP, undefeated season, spotlight on me, I like it. My head's getting bigger. And then I get called into the varsity coach's office. Varsity coach calls me in. He says, hey, Art, we haven't had a lot of time to chat over the last season here, but I've been watching you. I like what I see. He said, we're about to go into the playoffs. Your season has ended. I'm going to bring you up to the varsity for the playoffs. Don't normally do that, but I'm going to do that in this case. By the way, Jim's my starting goalie. You know Jim. And then I've got 2 to back him up, but you're going to be the number 2 guy. Something happens to Jim, you're going in, so you need to be ready. So I walk out of his office. However big my head was before, it was a lot bigger. And I was hoping classmates were going to come up to me and say, hey, what did the coach want? No one asked me, so I have to go up to people and go, hey, you want to know what the coach wanted? And they're like, no, not really. Well, let me tell you, I'm going up to the varsity. So, big man on campus. Go to the first playoff game, got the varsity jersey on, walk out onto the field to do my warm-ups. I'm thinking to myself, I'm the only sophomore out here. I got the varsity jersey on. And I can remember what I'm thinking is, I hope everybody in the crowd's watching me. I mean, I'm probably not going to get in, but at least I'm on the team. This is unbelievable. So I do the warm-ups, I come to the sideline, looking up and down. Yeah, only sophomore. Got the varsity jersey, hope everybody's seeing this. Barely paying attention to the game. It's all about me. I don't care about the game, the team, the coach, nothing. And all of a sudden in the second quarter, his shot rockets into Jim, the starting goalie, who drops to the ground. And I'm looking over going, wait a minute, I'm not just on the varsity, I'm about to go into a varsity playoff game, having never played that sport before today, before this particular season. So I get my equipment all set, I'm partway out on the field, the head coach attends to Jim. Jim's writhing in pain on the ground. Coach comes to me, we're about this far away from each other. Coach says, hey Art, that shot hit Jim where, it really hurts. Okay, coach. Yeah, and actually the shot shattered his cup. And we need your cup. So he said, hey, some of you guys get around Art. They gather around me. I reach down, get my cup, give it to Coach. He walks it out to Jim, who's standing by now. Jim puts my cup in, plays the rest of the game. I don't go in. So the next day, all those classmates of mine that I was hoping were watching, they were watching. They said things like, hey Art, we saw you didn't get in the game, but it looked like your cup had a great game. I was absolutely humiliated. I'd lost perspective. And that happens when we're on the wrong side of the spectrum. Arrogance blinds us. We don't even see it coming. I didn't see that coming. I'd gotten so full of myself, so arrogant towards this ability that I seemed to be able to demonstrate, that instead of wanting to help the team, it was a lot about me. So that's one of the bad things that can happen when we're on the wrong side of the spectrum. We lose perspective. Another thing that can happen to us is we churn. We churn inside. We don't get recognized. We don't get put in a program, or some big event happens and we did a lot, but no one ever notices it or says anything about it. Awards are given, we don't get one. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And what happens is, because we are on the wrong side of the spectrum, we take that incident and we begin to churn inside, and we spend an awful lot of time churning instead of leading. So I got stationed to Okinawa, Japan at one point in my career as a Marine captain. And I show up, I'm going to take command, but I had about 2 months until I could take command. So I had this colonel, 06, that brought me in to work on a project he was working on. So I'm an 03, he's an 06, which means he basically took the whole project and just gave it to me and said, you need to get this done. Well, what it was a rewrite of certain portions of the contingency plan if North Korea invaded South Korea. Some things haven't changed. That happened quite a few years ago. So I literally spend 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for an extended period of time to put this thing together, and then I give it to this colonel. So he reads it over. He goes, this is terrific work. Oh, well, thanks, sir. No, I mean, no, he says, this is really, really good. As a matter of fact, it's so good, I'm gonna put you in for, and he mentioned, you know, an award, a decoration. It wasn't a Medal of Honor, but, you know, it was a nice, you know, it was a nice gesture. I hadn't even thought about that, but now that he said it, I'm now kind of thinking, yeah, it was pretty doggone good. And certainly since he's mentioned it, I probably do deserve this thing. So now, since I deserve it so much in my own mind, I'm now waiting for it. And I wait, and then he leaves Okinawa, goes to a new duty assignment. I'm thinking, what happened to the, you know, little award or whatever, work I did? And I thought, that's all right. He's going to get to a new duty assignment, have a little bit more time. He'll send it back, everything will be fine. And then I get ready to rotate off of Okinawa. And then I'm thinking, this guy's brilliant. He's going to time it so my award shows up just as I get to this new unit. They don't know me that well. I'll be there standing at attention. They'll be presenting it. Everyone will be so impressed. And yeah, no award, ever. I knew this man afterwards. I never asked him, like, hey, Phil, whatever happened to that, you know, thing you thought? Never asked him. I don't think he probably thought about it again after he made that statement. Or maybe he did, I don't know, it could have gotten caught up in it. It doesn't matter. I'm sure he didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I did. Not all the time, but it would come up every once in a while, and I'd just churn a little bit inside, thinking to myself, yeah, you know, I deserve it. And as I'm doing that churning, I'm not leading the way that I should be because I'm focused on myself. Then I came across this little quote at about this time that really struck me hard. And it's written by a guy named A.W. Tozier, who was a preacher in Chicago many years ago. And he said this: "The labor of self-love is a heavy one. Think for yourself whether much of your sorrow has not arisen from someone speaking slightingly of you. The heart's fierce effort to protect itself from every slight, to shield its touchy honor from the bad opinion of friend and enemy, will never let the mind have rest. Yet many are carrying this burden continually, challenging every word spoken against them, cringing under every criticism, smarting under each fancied slight, tossing sleepless if another is preferred before them." And I thought, wow, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. If we're on the wrong side of the spectrum, it's another thing that can happen to us. We can churn about what we think is a slight against ourselves. And to be truthful, it ain't worth thinking about. But it affects our leadership. So we can lose perspective, we can churn. A third one is compromising our integrity. I get to see a lot of reports of Navy and Marine Corps very senior officers who get relieved, typically not for tactical incompetence, typically for a moral issue. So there's some kind of moral issue out there, but if you pull the chain, it ain't the moral issue. It's this person at some point got on the wrong side of the spectrum, and it was all about them. And they thought the rules didn't apply to them, or they thought the rules were stupid, or they thought, nobody will ever catch me. Because they're so smart. And because they become more and more arrogant, they see themselves as smarter and smarter. So this story always sticks in my mind. It's a good one because I can pick on the Navy on this one. So there's this guy, Commander Michael Ward, submariner. Now, I'm always impressed with submariners because I think, man, how do you do that? Like, you're under the water, you can't see anything, you got to avoid those underwater mountains and, you know, fire weapons from underneath the, I mean, I'm just always impressed with them. And then besides that, they're running a nuclear power plant. So it takes some real brains to keep moving forward in that line of work in the Navy. So Michael Ward gets selected to command the USS Pittsburgh, one of the newest attack submarines. But when he gets selected, he's at the Pentagon. He's married, he has 2 children. And one night, he decides, I'm going to creep around the internet a little bit. So he does that and gets to a dating site, gets hooked up with a young lady who's half his age, lives in Virginia Beach. So they meet each other and carry on this romance, the two of them. And then Michael Ward says to himself, ooh, I'm about to take command of the submarine. This isn't good to have this going on. I need to break this off somehow. So he decides, the smart submariner that he is, he's going to set up a false email account and have an email sent to the girl, but not from him, but from a friend of his but he's the one who's really writing it. But it's another email account, so she won't recognize it. And he's going to write the email